did a job, customer is concerned about something, and you got to come back and either find something wrong that you can fix or convince them this really isn't a problem.
Yeah.
And I'm not lying to you. I hate those situations.
Yeah. Have you heard of common sense?
Welcome to the Fine Home Building Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics. Aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. You're listening to the sweet sounds of Matthew Milham.
Hello.
Patrick McComb.
Hello.
And Justin Fink, me. You're also hearing the silence, the deafening silence of Jeff Rose, working the controls in the camera. And that camera is what we are using to post the video on finehomebuilding.com/podcast, or you can also see it on YouTube. You can check out some notes from this show at fhbpodcast@taunton.com. Oh, sorry, that's where you're going to get in touch with us, fhbpodcast@taunton.com. Okay. That's everything, I think. Show notes, yeah. Okay. Whew. There's a lot of addresses I have to keep juggling up in this.
It really is dazzling how you do it.
It is. I'm very dumb, so the fact that I can get this mostly right is
dazzling.
It's dazzling. So what the heck's going on, guys?
There was a rabbit in my house last night that the cats brought in, unrelated to home building. That was the excitement in my house.
Your cats caught a rabbit?
A baby rabbit.
Did you keep it? I like rabbits.
Oh, I kind of wanted to. I put it in a box for about 10 minutes and then caught the cats, locked them in a room, and found the rabbit a safe place outside.
At least safer now.
Yeah.
How does one catch a rabbit in the house?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I just put gloves on and picked it up.
It didn't try and run from you?
No, it ran into a corner, and then it just sat there and was like, I don't know where to go now. And
Did you ever see the scene from Rocky where he's chasing the chickens?
Yes.
For training? That's what Matt does. So if you can catch a chicken, you can definitely catch a rabbit.
Oh, God, that's great.
And you, Patrick, were doing some chainsaw testing recently, were you not?
Yeah, last week I was testing cordless chainsaws from DeWalt, Makita, and Milwaukee. They're all 16 inches. They use
video soon to come, right?
Yeah, video soon to come.
Yeah.
They're all 16 inches and use the battery platforms you likely have for your power tools. So, very handy tool.
What's the consensus? Am I throwing away my regular chainsaw?
I wouldn't do that yet, because if you're using it constantly, and we all know sometimes when you're chainsawing, you just can't stop, right?
Yeah.
If you're trying to clear the tree from your driveway, or if you're in the middle of a felling cut, you need to not stop.
Sometimes you just can't stop.
You just can't stop.
Once you get going.
The thing is, they are super handy for like cleaning up fallen limbs and for cutting beams, and I really like them.
Because I'm asking because I recently got the DeWalt string trimmer, and I knew people had said it was good, but it was sort of like I couldn't imagine in my head this thing was going to be as good as a gas one. There's no way. It's a cordless tool. But I don't know why I think that when I think of the fact that I'm stirring buckets of joint compound with a cordless tool. I'm driving giant lags. But somehow in my head, I'm still stupid enough that
a string trimmer was beyond.
Yeah. It can't possibly cut grass. But so it finally took that somebody stole a couple of things out of my shed, one of them being a chainsaw, one of them being a string trimmer.
Oh, fantastic.
So I got the new string trimmer, the DeWalt string trimmer. I'm already on that platform. And the thing is so badass.
Yeah, and it's quiet.
It's quiet. I didn't realize until I was done using it for my entire yard, and I didn't have a string trimmer, so it was getting overgrown. I let it go for as long as I could before even I started to feel embarrassed about how much I needed to use a string trimmer. So I busted it out. I used it. It just chewed through everything. The bump feed system was totally equal to anything I've used on a gas one. The speed, the performance, all of it. The only thing I found that was kind of a complaint about it was that the shroud that protects you from stuff flying off was kind of small. Mm-hmm. But I know that a lot of guys take that off on theirs, especially professional guys who do this
for edging and stuff. Yeah.
And I didn't even, in terms of battery life, I didn't even realize until I was done. I probably did about a half hour of continuous trigger pulling. And I didn't realize until after I was done that it had a high and a low setting. And I had it on high the entire time, and no problem. I feel like the battery has a little indicator, and it definitely was not drained. So I really don't even know what the downside is. It's probably less expensive than buying a gas model.
I don't think that's true. I think once you factor in a couple batteries,
it comes with one. It comes with a battery and a charger, and I think it was $170.
You're not going out to buy gas all the time.
It'll start, for instance.
I can tell you the battery-powered chainsaws are significantly more than their gas counterparts.
Now I believe that the string trimmer is possible. I still don't believe that the chainsaw is possible.
They cut really well, up to about 12 inches of oak I was cutting with these things, and they're totally bona fide.
So where did you get the logs for this test?
So a macro burst blew through Newtown.
What the hell is a macro burst?
Right, I'd never heard of one either. So it's a big microburst, a huge,
Still not helping.
a thunderstorm with really intense winds, and it blew through Newtown. I believe it was June 15th was the date, and I lost 3 mature oak trees on my property, and another oak tree from my neighbor's lawn fell onto our property as well. And so I've had a great opportunity to put these things through their paces like in a real environment. And they're not made for like bucking up 24-inch logs, A, because the bar is not long enough, and B, the runtime is just not there. But like for cutting up big branches, they're totally adequate.
How long do you think, like, let's just say I'm doing continuous cutting of, I don't know, like a 6-inch wide, 6-inch diameter log. I mean, can I go for a half hour? 15 minutes?
Oh, I would say, well, so I use them to cut up a lot of branches, and so you cut and then you move stuff, and you cut and move stuff. So it's not like you're holding the trigger constantly, but hours of work was possible.
Oh, okay.
And I found, and then coincidentally, this past Friday, I lost another huge limb when my rotting catalpa, which survived the thunderstorm, but lost a branch that was probably 18 inches in diameter and took down a large cherry branch in the same time when it fell. And so I used one of the saws to cut up that entire 14-inch cherry branch, and it filled the bed of my Dakota pickup truck. So that gives you an idea how much
Not
wood
a sponsor.
how much wood I actually cut up. So it's a lot.
The only thing I worry about with those, and it's not even really a worry, but like with a gas saw, to put bar oil in pretty much every time you add gas, and you know when to add gas because it turns off. So
Right.
how do you keep track of the bar oil with
It's a really good question, and I did find it was tough to remember that. But they have oil tanks big enough that will last through the battery, right? So when you swap batteries, you put oil in it.
That's your answer.
Yeah.
It runs out of batteries instead of gas.
Sweet.
So the thing that's notable about these saws is they have a narrow kerf chain, and I believe it's .043 or .048 inches, and a normal chain I believe is .050. And the interesting thing about that is, like a thin kerf saw blade, it provides less resistance so that you get more yield from the batteries, more cuts, what have you. But the interesting about them is they stretch all at once. When you heat them up, like cutting a big log, start to finish, you better check the chain when you're done, because the first couple cuts, it'll stretch enough that it'll throw the chain off the saw when you're using it.
And are you saying that that's different than a full kerf?
Yeah, it's
chainsaw
different
blade?
than my experience with a full kerf.
So does this mean that I'm buying a chainsaw blade from online somewhere instead of going to the store to get one?
So I did find the blades on Amazon and home centers. It's a standard size for other cordless chainsaws as well, besides these from the power tool makers.
Okay.
And some gas saws now are using, and some arborists are using these thin kerf chains to get more yield from their gas saws too, right? Less cutting. So they're not that hard to find, which I was pleasantly surprised to find.
Yeah.
And they're not that expensive either. It's like $15 for the 16-inch chain.
I wonder if that chain is the same one that they put on corded chainsaws. Because, like the home centers often have like a low model plug-in kind of a thing.
The one from Oregon is an R56, and that refers to 56 links on the chain. So our readers would know if that's what they're using on their cord-powered chainsaws, their electric chainsaws with a cord. Yeah. It's a fascinating thing, and like you suggest, a few years ago this would have been completely laughable, right? But now it's a reality, and like I said, it won't replace your gas saw because sometimes you just need to cut too much and you can't charge the batteries fast enough. These all have so the Makita has two 18-volt packs. The Milwaukee has a 12 amp hour battery, a single 18-volt pack that's as big as a motorcycle battery, if you guys are familiar with how big that is. And then the DeWalt uses the Flex Volt pack, which is a 60-volt nominal multi-voltage pack.
I would not want to have a motorcycle battery attached to a tool that I'm using.
It makes it heavy, Justin. It really does.
Well, so the battery discussion is really interesting because I started to think, well, I wonder what's coming next, right? I mean, a lot of these companies are moving into these yard tools.
Mm-hmm. It's very true.
Blowers, chainsaws, string trimmers.
Hedge trimmers.
And you think back, it's not like you think about a forklift, like a reach style forklift you see in like a home center. Those are battery powered. I mean, obviously we have solar panels. Those have battery storage. Like, we don't have any problem with really high capacity batteries that are super heavy.
Right.
It's the balance of lightweight batteries that also give you good storage performance that is sort of what we're trying to push into now with the battery technology. For these high draw tools, that's a big deal. For your iPhone, we kind of have it figured out. It can be pretty slim. For a power tool, though, to get those high amp hours, when you pull that trigger, that's a hard thing to do. So I guess what I'm saying is if they were trying to make a forklift that ran on batteries with a really light battery, we'd be screwed because they wouldn't have enough power to get it. And that's what they're kind of facing with cars, it seems like, is kind of that. But I wonder where are we going to go next with home building? Like what is the tool that people haven't figured out how to do yet? I mean, at this point, we're doing table saws and miter saws.
Circular saws.
Yeah.
All are bona fide, right? They're not toys. They are legitimate tools.
Nobody's done like a cordless big router yet that I've seen. It's only little trim routers.
Quarter-inch trim routers, yeah. It's a big motor on a router, right?
Yeah.
And it's used oftentimes for extended periods, right? You're running a lot of edge profiling or rabbiting or whatever.
What do you think about a compressor? Why isn't that something? I mean, compressors.
They exist.
They
exist.
Big ones?
Pancakes.
Because I'm wondering, like, that's already heavy. Twin tank compressor's already a boat anchor. So, carrying it and putting it down and then carrying over a big battery and sliding it in doesn't seem like a huge compromise to me, especially if it means that I don't have to have temporary power.
Right. Well, and I think that's the way the manufacturers are going.
Or a battery-powered generator.
And a point becomes, do you even need an air compressor? Because now you have battery-powered framing nailers, that are legitimate tools in their own right. So, I mean,
I wonder if it'll get to the point where we just have like a giant brick on the job site. Like it's just this big
power
supply. You drop it and you plug everything into it.
Yeah.
Like charge it at home, put it in the back of the truck, wheel it over, plop it down, and plug all your tools in, and you're good for the day. Mm-hmm. That would be awesome.
I see that happening. I really
awesome.
do. I think there's going to be a big leap in technology with regard to the battery chemistry. You're seeing it already. Like, who could have imagined that you could have a 12 amp hour, 18 volt battery pack even a couple years ago? It just was not. It was unheard of.
Yeah,
but it's not small, like you said.
It's big and heavy.
We're going to look back at how big and heavy they are, and we're going to laugh at that. Like, oh my God, we were putting pretty much a modular brick on the back of the.
Mm-hmm. It's like doubling the weight of the tool.
Yeah,
to be
it's
honest,
hard to get the balance right when you do that. That's the tough part.
Yeah.
Is like with tool design.
Well, that's
tough.
You got to design around all these different size batteries because I mean, you can put a 2, a 5, a 12. Well, maybe not a 12 on some of these, but
some of them.
Yeah.
So this big 12 amp hour battery will not fit on all the Milwaukee tools.
No,
it just doesn't fit.
I tried to actually, just as a joke, tried to put it on my my impact driver, and the hook actually is the only thing that seems to interfere with it. But
You could take that off.
I know I was going to take it off and put it on there just to be silly with it, but
What I really liked about Makita's arrangement with, so they take two like standard sized 18 volt packs for their chainsaw, and they're like 5 amp hours, so you can actually use those on an impact driver or a drill, unlike Milwaukee's boat anchor battery, which, like as you point out, is either not going to fit or be ridiculously heavy. So it's a neat how they have different approaches.
Matt, you've got the you've got that new Milwaukee table
Yeah.
saw, cordless table saw at
Yeah.
home. Did you start playing with it yet?
I've only turned it on. I haven't done anything
Did
with
it
it
turn
yet.
on?
Yeah, turned on great.
All right, it works. 5 stars.
Yeah. No, and it just sounds like a battery
saw.
saw. Yeah.
Did you look at it side by side with the Bosch?
Yeah,
Because we were when we first looked
DeWalt,
at it,
you
we were
mean?
With the
sorry,
DeWalt,
DeWalt.
yeah.
Yeah, we were all talking about how it looked just like that small DeWalt.
Yeah, and there are some differences.
Is that out yet, Patrick? That Milwaukee, or is it? Or
I think
did
it
we
just
get one
hit the
early?
market.
Okay.
I think it just hit the sales.
Yeah, so where the blade comes up through the table is shifted slightly in the table. It's like closer to the back edge of the table.
to give you a little more in-feed room.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And there were some other differences that I can't remember off the top of my head when I was
They're pretty minimal.
looking at
Like
it.
it has a square tube frame instead of round tube is something I noticed. But the most notable thing and what you picked up on is the fence has that rack and pinion arrangement that
That
people
fence is
really like.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that thing's great. The on-off switch seems maybe better than the one on the DeWalt. I mean, the DeWalt battery operated table saw. But I mean, the plug-in one that I have is perfectly fine too.
You have the small DeWalt plug-in right now? Or-
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I like that little saw.
yeah.
Okay, let's do some questions. Adam writes, guys, I'm building a no-step entry house, which has front and back attached. I think I put the emphasis in the wrong place there. I'm building a no-step entry house, which has the front and back attached porches. The treated porch columns are anchored to a concrete footing wall, which sits lower than desired. The porches will be finished with pavers, but to achieve a no-step entry, the porches would first have to be backfilled. The problem with this is that the backfill will be burying the columns by about 6 to 9 inches. I'm worried about backfilling around these critical structural members in an active termite area. Do you have suggestions on keeping these columns safe from moisture and termites for years to come? I'm thinking my best route would be to tar the bottom perimeter of the columns and pack around them with larger 3/4 inch rock, pea gravel, or sewer chips. What do you think? All right, so basically we've got piers that are not the right height.
I think that's what it boils down to. The piers need to
Yeah.
be taller, right?
But I mean, they're poured now, so
Well, can we add masonry to the top of them and cut off the posts?
I started to think about that. What would you add?
Well,
6 to 9 inches of concrete.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, would you pour it though?
I would do solid block and more, stacked masonry.
Yeah. I even wondered at that point, could you buy those precast, those pyramid shaped ones, and
Yeah.
just like somehow connect
Anchor
them?
it.
You could totally do
that's
that.
what I was
I don't know how
thinking
you'd
too.
anchor them.
I think epoxy, into the bottom of that post base, and then a hole into the footing, and connect them with rod epoxied into both.
So a rod slid into the top of the existing pier, slide the precast concrete over that, and then tighten it down with a washer and nut kind of a deal.
No, I was fill the hole with halfway with epoxy, put a rod in, fill the other hole halfway with epoxy, and then stick it over
so
there.
like a big dowel.
Exactly, a dowel that connects the two things.
Yeah.
And they make some of those things precast with a hole already through it. If that rod is long enough, and then you can just
Bolt it down.
bolt it down, put a nut on top.
I wonder if
bolt it
that
down.
hole is big enough. Like if he already has a thread, if he has like a J-bolt coming out the top of the pier, if you could couple on something and extend it, and then put this hollow block, the pyramid shaped block down, and then tighten it down with a nut and washer.
Given the hardware he has there, it doesn't seem like that's his attachment method. It seems like a
It's
Simpson connector is bolted. Right.
You want me to actually look at the picture?
I think it helps.
So he's got
Explain it.
So he's got a PT post sitting right on a little, what looks like a little footing wall,
Right.
A little poured concrete
yeah. I
stem
mean,
wall kind of a thing.
yeah. I mean,
That shouldn't be that way anyway. By the way,
It's a bad detail.
Yeah.
Your post shouldn't be resting right on the concrete.
yeah.
They
his-
make little standoffs to
Yeah.
get it off the concrete.
Even though it's PT, you don't want that. That's
Yeah.
going to be where it fails. If you, I would be more worried about that than having dirt surround the sides.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of his solution here either. Like,
Get
if
him,
he-
Matt.
Yeah, no, I mean, if he thinks that that's going to keep termites away, I think that he's kind of barking up the wrong tree, because I don't think gravel's really going to keep them away. And there
Well,
have been,
if you keep it dry, then the termites won't be interested,
Yeah.
right? That's the theory.
right, but he's going to be burying this, and there's going to be
And what's
some
going to prevent it
moisture
from
in there.
filling up with water?
Right, yeah.
Well,
But there have been studies of this actual specific thing, I guess, like the difference between using either wood mulch or stone mulch, and they find that it isn't really a deterrent to termites.
I suppose if you coated the whole bottom of it in tar, that wouldn't necessarily, I guess that could help. I don't know if termites are going to go through tar.
No, I mean, I would think that would help, but I don't know that
I don't know
that's
what tar you're dipping these in, but
Yeah.
I'm talking like driveway sealant, and you just open the 5-gallon bucket and
Dip
dunk
it
it.
in
brush
there.
it on.
I mean, I've been tempted to do that for some things.
Yeah.
I think he's got to cut off these posts and raise the pier, the footing, to be a flush or slightly above what his finished concrete walkway will be.
And I mean, we're talking about like epoxy and rod, but you could also just clean off that slab, the little stem wall you have right now, really well. Hose it down, brush it off, hose it down, let it dry, and then put on some sort of a concrete bonding additive, and then just mortar on a couple of extra solid blocks.
Lay up
to
some
get
blocks.
some height. Yeah, I mean, they do that all the time when foundations are not poured exactly right. Oh, we got this step in the foundation wrong, so we need to build it back up with hollow block or whatever. And that, by the way, I mean, that will give you the opportunity at that point to then put in the right standoff to keep that post from touching the concrete, because you don't want that.
Good question.
Yeah. Did we skip anything else? That was it, I think. All right. Dustin writes, "Hey guys, I built a Trex deck late last fall for a customer, and they're concerned it is holding water on the surface too long after a rain. The photos below were taken over a 2.5-hour period with about 20 minutes between each photo. It was, I didn't include all the photos, Jeff. It was 75 degrees, sunny, and barely a breeze the day I took the photos. The deck was constructed with treated lumber for framing, and I installed the Trex with hidden fasteners. I feel that the drying time for the deck isn't a concern, and the variation in drying time is due to shadows and differences in the lumber as it dries. Would you guys agree by looking at the photos? If not, what did I do wrong, and how do I address it with the customer now?" So this is like a classic example of you did a job, customer is concerned about something, and you got to come back and either find something wrong that you can fix or convince them this
There's
really isn't a
nothing wrong.
problem,
Yeah.
and I'm not lying to you. I hate those situations.
Yeah. Have you heard of common sense? I mean, looking at these pictures, like,
Well-
it seems like the guy's 100% right.
Yeah.
It is just shadows.
It's wet from rain.
It's wet from rain. Have you heard of rain? It makes things wet.
I had a chance to talk to Dustin about this one because he sent the note and we couldn't get to the question fast enough, and he had to go talk to the customer. So
Right.
he sent me a note, and we were chatting back and forth a bit. And like in my head, we kind of went step by step through it. I didn't have all the photos, and I thought first impression is I started thinking about EPDM roofs and that kind of general rule of thumb that as long as like EPDM roofs can hold water a little bit, as long as it dries within around 24 hours, it's kind of accepted tolerances of pooling, right? So I said, all right, so there's that. Like maybe it's holding a little water. It's not going to hurt anything. And if it dries within 24 hours, it's not really an issue. Okay, so it didn't even take that long to dry, he's saying. So that right there is, I think we're fine. The next thing that I jumped to was, what kind of decking did you use? What kind of Trex decking? Because when you use that co-extruded stuff, the capstock decking, where the outer layer is a different density of plastic than the core, those boards often have a slight crown to them, or not crown, like a bow. So one surface will be slightly concave, and the other usually is slightly convex. And if they're printed with grain on both sides, it's important to look at those to make sure you're not putting the cup side up, because that will hold a little more water than the other direction. Again, kind of a nitpicky point because it's not going to matter with the water anyway, but it might make your customer happy. So I thought, great, depending on what kind of decking you got, pop those boards out, flip them over so that they're draining water, and then the customer will feel like, wow, you really addressed this. He said I checked them with a square that I laid across, dead flat.
Yeah.
It's like, all right.
You can tell in the photo they're flat.
Yeah.
It's pretty subtle, though. No, I mean, if you look at it.
Right.
And maybe this was years ago that I was kind of clued into that, so maybe that's been addressed.
You can see in the photo that
But also these Trex boards they're not two-sided.
yeah,
So he had no choice.
they're the the less expensive material.
Yeah.
And you can see in the photo that the shadow from what looks like an overhang or the building itself is where it's wet, and where it's getting some sun, it's dry.
Yeah.
And if it's high humidity outside, it could take hours and hours
Yep.
or days to dry, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
I think he's in the clear.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it would be possible to start to think about the framing below it, but the photos just don't tell that story. You know,
Yeah.
if you had some, like, I guess if he's worried about joists not being level to each other or sagged in the middle or something, and that's why there's all these gaps between deck boards. That's the point of that. I will say that if another thing you can do that I think should be done on all decks anyway is to give it a slight pitch. You shouldn't be building your deck so that it's dead level.
What do you suggest?
Drop you figure out where the rim is going to go, extend that line out, and then drop it by like a 1/4 inch per foot, or even just like a 1/4, 1/2 inch total across the width. The depth of the deck is going to encourage water to flow away from the house.
I think a 1/4 inch per foot would be too much. I think you'd pick
It
that up.
depends on the size of the deck. I mean, if you have a huge deck, but I mean, it's the same principle for porches. You want to make sure the water's encouraged to go away from the house rather than the chance that it might rest against it.
Yeah.
So here's another question. So when you have a customer who's unhappy unreasonably, what is the fix?
This is really tough because it's going to
Change your
appear to
phone
the
number.
customer that this is your word against theirs.
So I think maybe you bring in the Trex rep to say, like, come out, check it out. If you're a regular Trex user, my understanding is the company is very helpful in those kind of instances. So I think you bring someone else in, and that way it's not your word against theirs.
Yep.
And
you also, you paint them a logical picture. You say, I've taken a look at the framing. I've taken a look at the deck boards. I've wet it down. I've watched it dry. It's very clear that it's staying wet in the shade. I mean, you run through all of these reasonable things and say, and even if it was holding a little water, it may be an aesthetic trade-off for a couple of hours till it dries, but there's no chance of damage here from that. So you're in the clear. And then tell them that you talked to Fine Homebuilding and that we said it was fine. So we Dustin did a good job. All right. Brad's got a long one for us here. I'm going to boil this thing down. Brad says, my current project is a full gut remodel, but not the typical remodel. Dun, dun, dun. Throughout the years, structure after structure on this property was demolished, eventually leaving behind an 18-foot by 24-foot addition off the main barn used as the milk house. The structure has seen its fair share of, quote, carpenters through a few changes and additions to the framing and interior. That brings us to today. As of this email, I have rebuilt one gable end wall, fixed some framing in the existing wall, a few new rafters, new sheathing, and framed in a new bathroom and loft. The interior of the cabin will be cathedral ceiling with 12 foot to the peak. The structure of the walls are 2x4s, and the roof rafters are 2x6s. Rock wool will be installed, and 1 1/4 inch of polyiso will be added to the entire interior. We're going this route due to the choice of leaving the siding alone for now and addressing that later down the road. Okay, so addressing the lack of insulation in the ceiling and considering its design of a cathedral ceiling, should I be worried about venting from soffit to ridge? So let me just hit the assembly from the interior to the exterior. So innermost layer is tongue and groove pine, then 1 1/4 inch of polyiso, 2x6 rafter with 6 inches of rock wool in between the cavities, then 5/8 inch zip system sheathing, DuPont roofing underlayment, and then metal roofing. So venting, he said, should I build a cold roof? Wouldn't that be a hot roof?
Mm-hmm.
I think people use those terms interchangeably.
Yeah. Well, no, a cold roof is when you have ventilation on the top of the roof deck.
I think people use those terms interchangeably.
Well, they need to stop. Okay, so future reference. A hot roof is when your impermeable insulation is on the underside of the sheathing. It's an unvented roof. Therefore, it's a hot roof. Cold roof is one where you build the roof and insulate it as normal, and then you create an airspace above the roof deck. It's really common in areas of super high snow loads because it keeps the
ice damming it.
Yeah,
at bay.
At bay. Get ventilation under the snow, basically. So, what are you guys worried about in this assembly?
So, one thing that anytime I see a tongue and groove ceiling, right, we have to be concerned about air leakage, right?
Yes.
Because the warm, moist air is going to filter through all those little cracks in the tongue and groove boards. And in the wintertime, it's going to condense on the cold roof sheathing and lead to a moldy, rotten mess.
Molten.
Not molten, moldy.
Yes.
And especially with his metal roof, it's going to provide no drying potential. So that is a very risky assembly. But
would you say asphalt shingles provide some?
The
At least more.
evidence would suggest not. I always thought they did, but research has shown that there is very little drying through asphalt shingles, which is surprising to me.
Yeah.
But he could address this with his polyiso layer, assuming he tapes the seams. The only concern is fastening through that material to install. The TNG is going to put a bunch of holes in it. So the best practice would be to actually put a drywall layer between the tongue and groove ceiling and the insulation stack up.
I think the insulation should not be that close to the interior. I think it should be up against the roof deck. That's my opinion. I think you need
his method solves the thermal bridging problem or slows thermal bridging, whereas
Right.
if you're putting the polyiso in between the rafters, you have that thermal bridging through the rafters.
Yeah, but you have a roof that's more reliably. Yeah, I guess theoretically it could go either way. I see what you're saying. So in your mind, if he does a perfect job with that interior-most layer of polyiso, he has reliably created an air barrier to protect his roof structure, and he solved thermal bridging. I could see that as long as it's detailed right.
As long as it's detailed right, and putting
And that's gonna no air leaks. You gotta
an unvented,
meticulous.
assembly with fiber insulation is risky, right? Because any leaks will allow that interior moisture-laden air to get in contact with the cold sheathing. So
Right.
you got to do it right.
Yeah.
And he doesn't have enough R value there that it's going to prevent heat from going up through that roof assembly. And I mean, the metal roof at least is going to keep him from getting ice dams.
Hopefully. I mean,
Hopefully, but he might still have some ice
might still
build up
have
on
ice
the edges.
dams, but it won't.
It won't get up underneath the shingles
Right.
and leak into his house.
I think this particular ceiling is a perfect candidate for spray foam, high density, 2-pound spray foam.
Well, I guess that's why I'm saying that's not going to solve
the thermal bridging.
thermal bridging. So at that point, you could also put polyiso between the rafters all the way up against the roof decking, and foam those gaps between each rafter and the foam, and then fill the balance of the cavity with
Fiber.
whatever you want, fiber insulation. But I'm lost a little bit about what you're saying, Matt. Are you implying that if he had deeper rafters that you could just use rock wool and you'd be okay?
No, I mean for this for
leave
an
it unvented,
unvented assembly, yeah. I mean with an unvented assembly, I think you either want to get all of the foam on top of the roof, or you can have a bunch of foam on top of the roof and some kind of batt insulation in the bays, or you just fill those bays with some sort of like spray foam, vapor impermeable closed cell spray foam.
Or you can use cut and cobble approach of putting. Yeah, but I mean, if he's doing it from the word go, it doesn't have roofing on there yet.
It sounds like he has already touched the top of the roof when he gets deeper into the question. So
No, I cut some of it out of there.
yeah, and I think whatever he's going to do now, he has to address from below.
Hey, Patrick, he said if I add thickness to the rafters, I lose headroom in the loft, which isn't ideal. As I'm writing this, I should have considered adding thickness to the top of the rafters while the roof is off. Okay, I see what you're saying, Matt. Yeah, but he did the sheathing. I don't know. Maybe he just still has sheathing on there right now, which means he could still add foam
On top of the sheeting.
The
or-
best
or
assembly
mineral
would be to
wool
move
boards.
that rigid insulation to the exterior.
Yeah. Do you think that's what I should do in my garage?
Yeah. Keeps the sheathing dry.
But what would you use? What kind of insulation?
So you may know that I'm a huge fan of reclaimed polyiso.
It is easier to feel better about it when it's recycled
And it's cheap, Justin.
because you're saving it from the landfill.
It's a third the price of new material. And my experience was fantastic with it.
How much did you have to deal with slightly dissimilar thicknesses?
All my pieces were exactly the same thickness. They were all 1.5 inches, yeah.
And you bought it by a truckload.
I did. I bought what I think amounted to 3 pallets. And what this company does, Insulation Depot, is I've heard universally from the other people I've talked to who've used it, is they send more than you think you're getting to make up for the inevitable broken pieces and stuff that happens when you pull old insulation off a commercial roof. So,
right, and that's what they're doing. They're
doing.
recycling old roofs.
And they bring it in a tractor trailer to your job site, and you need a way to unload it. When you think about insulation being lightweight, and this is what I was thinking before it was delivered, you're thinking of a sheet or two, but when you have pallets of it, you really need a forklift to move it, or you're going to spend hours unloading a truck, which is what I had to do with my wife's help.
So they didn't come with a forklift?
No.
Well, I don't have a forklift, so what am I supposed to do?
You're going to have to pull it off the pallets and stack it. And
that driver's going to be pissed.
It took us about an hour to do it, and the driver helped.
He hated you, but he helped.
He was cool. He was totally cool.
Yeah.
You can't just back up at like 60 miles an hour and slam on the brakes.
Yeah, exactly.
So he did have a pallet jack, but obviously that doesn't help unless you have a ramp. So, I mean, you could rig up a ramp to do it that way too. So
I don't want pallets going down a ramp with me at the bottom of it.
Understand.
That's not fun. How much, do you remember how much you spent for that?
I want to say it was like $1,500.
Yeah, that's an insanely good deal compared to buying all that new. I'm just really curious about using something like mineral wool. It just seems like that category keeps expanding. Like in the next issue of the magazine, we have this fine home building house that the one we're doing right now is out in California, and they're using several different kinds of rock wool in the build, and they're using these super high density ones on the roof that are so dense you can walk on them and they don't even compress. So I just feel like those.
What
are
do you see the
such
advantage
cool...
of that versus polyiso or fiberglass? I mean, why?
No off-gassing.
Yeah, I just see an environmental benefit.
You think like using rock to make insulation is less embodied energy?
Well, it's natural, so if you have to throw it away, it's not going to be as much of a burden. That's really the way I see it.
Turtles aren't going to be eating it.
Do turtles eat
I don't think they eat spray foam. Rigid foam.
I just like, I hear the argument that it's more environmentally benign, but I just have trouble believing that, and it might be my own ignorance, but...
If they could get the process to where they're turning the slag immediately into insulation rather than having to reheat it, then yeah, it's fantastic. But yeah, in the current process where they're taking the already cooled slag and adding stuff to it and then reblowing it, it is a little energy intensive.
Yeah.
And we're not supposed to use XPS because of its insane global warming potential.
Mm-hmm. EPS is still pretty okay, isn't it?
EPS is like, I think, second best.
I think nerdies, greenie weenies still feel okay about that.
Yeah, I think they like it better, but polyiso is definitely the most environmentally benign by everything I've read.
Really?
Yeah. Because it doesn't use hydrofluorocarbons as a blowing agent.
What does it use?
I thought it was water vapor, but I'm not totally sure.
Because spray foam uses
low density half-pound spray foams use water vapor.
Yeah, but these aren't open cell. They're closed cell, aren't they? Isn't polyiso closed cell?
It is.
Yeah, for 6.5 per inch. That's what you're gonna have to. Yeah. I mean, to your point, this is already recycled if you buy it from Insulation Depot, which,
it's awesome, right?
At least that. I mean, I still think you could feel good about that.
I do too.
If your end result is trying to keep some things out of the landfill, and that's their whole job is. It says on their website, we divert non-biodegradable and bulky products from local landfills.
And it's cheap.
Yeah.
Which I love. Most of it all.
Oh, wait, hold on a second. I'm on the site. I want to see how much it costs. I found a little buy it now button. Let me see if I can get Well, we're
While you're looking at that, I was going to tell folks that
Jeff can also play elevator music.
I was going to just say they don't always have exactly what you want. So what you have to do is keep an eye out and contact them and tell them what you're seeking, and they'll let you know when they have some.
Oh man, they have reclaimed dimensional lumber too.
Really?
$250 per piece. This thing is really expanded. It used to be just insulation.
It's a great idea. I mean, because can you imagine what would take up more room in a landfill than like commercial roofing insulation, right? It's cubic yards.
Yeah, okay, let's see. Once used rigid foam board. Looks like $20 a pop. No, sorry. Prices from $5 to $20 per sheet based upon type and amount required. Yeah. I mean, you're buying a truckload essentially when you buy this.
And you pay shipping based on where it's coming from to where your job site is,
Sure.
right? So that's going to vary a lot. I know my particular insulation came from a warehouse in New Jersey, and I want to say it was a third of the cost was shipping versus the insulation. So I want to say like I spent $1,000 on insulation and $500 to get it to my job.
Okay.
So that's going to vary.
And that was enough for your entire outbuilding?
Yeah.
And you had a big barn.
1,100 square feet of floor space, right? And I put 2 layers of 1.5 inch polyiso on the walls, and I cut and cobbled the attic rafter bays with 3 layers.
Yeah, because I wouldn't mind leaving the rafter bays open in mine because it's a workshop and I like the look of looking up and seeing wood.
If I had to do this all over again, I should have put the insulation on the top side of the sheathing, but money was so tight, I didn't want to pay for a second layer of sheathing and the big screws.
Yeah.
You're talking hundreds of dollars.
Yeah, it does. That does add up. In that case, would you do the lower sheathing as just like OSB, and then the outermost as, let's say that you're a fan of zip system, which I am. You'd make the uppermost layer zip system, or vice versa. I guess if you're worried about air sealing, you might want that lowermost.
And
to be the one that you
racking,
tape.
if you put the foam in between the sheathing and the framing, you'd have way less racking resistance. So
Yeah.
Put the foam between the.
You need the structural sheathing on the
On the
No, I
frame.
meant
the
2
framing,
layers versus.
Right.
oh,
I mean, like if you had 2 layers, and you like to use zip system,
I'd put that on the exterior.
you put the zip on the exterior.
I would.
Yeah.
But then your air seal.
But so polyiso will take on
Air seal.
water, right?
That's true. You can
So-
also use it for the air seal if you wanted to.
You need a weather barrier if you're going to use polyiso wall insulation. Like XPS foam can be taped to be your weather barrier too, if you're careful. But
Well, that's not true depending on what the skin of it is, right? I mean, yours was like fiberglass faced, wasn't it?
yes,
I mean, if it's the
foil
faced,
yes.
you might be better off, but probably still best to not risk that.
I think using foam as a weather barrier is a dodgy prospect, just for the reason that like I don't think tape is going to stick long term to foam products.
We're all sort of holding our breath, aren't we?
Yeah, I just don't buy it.
Yeah. It hasn't failed yet, but
Has anyone checked?
I don't know.
I mean, are people like taking off their siding to see if their tape is still sticking?
We're getting to that point, and even then it's going to be unclear because so many people don't install the tape.
They're not rolling it.
They're not rolling it out. They're not.
And environmental conditions
brushing
are
off the
so
surfaces,
variable,
yeah.
both in the service and when it's installed.
Yeah,
you know.
was it raining that
Yeah.
day or whatever? How cold was it? I'm of the belief that if you have to build a new house, don't do it in the middle of the winter because I just think that quality is inevitably going to be lower in the winter. Even from the best builder, I think people aren't thinking as clearly. They're not as interested in really dialing in the details when it's freaking freezing outside and everything's frozen and nothing is sticking right.
I got to tell you, I've been there when I'm just like, this is good enough because I am freezing and
That's what I
miserable.
mean.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And I don't want to totally broad stroke generalize that, but I just think it's more conducive to building when it's the
Nice
spring
out.
and summer
Yeah.
and fall. I mean, people want to be outside. They're going to really babysit that detail because they don't want to leave. All right, that's going to wrap us up for this week. Find homebuilding.com/podcast, fhbpodcast@taunton.com, www.jeffrose.com, and this is Justin saying goodbye and good luck for Matt, Jeff, and Patrick. Keep craft alive and happy building.